welcome everyone. I just want to remind you that next week our series begins of the 3 films that will be at the Savoy Theater, so we won't be here. Next week we'll be at the Savoy, same Wednesday, same 1:30, and we won't have a film the day before Thanksgiving. There'll be 2 in December. And then I want to go right to our program since we're getting a late start here. I've been excited about this for weeks, and I'm glad other people have been too. A fire severely damaged Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris in 2019. The volunteer group Carpenters Without Borders helped convince the French government to rebuild the cathedral. We're lucky to have Vermont timber framer Josh Jackson to describe his work on that rebuild. Josh received his BSME from Yale in 1989 and promptly bicycled across country to San Francisco, where he worked for Pacific Gas and Electric on energy conservation. And I will stop there and ask you to please welcome Josh Jackson.
Thank you. I guess I need to be near this. So yeah, I'm going to share my story. I'm not a historian. I wasn't involved in many aspects of this adventure, but I had an incredible adventure, and really that's what I'm here to share with you, and some great pictures of France for those of you that love the place. And I'll start here. This is the gang that I got to work with when I was working on Notre Dame, and it's a nice mix. The
Wait until we finish checking in. Just give us a minute.
So it was quite a small company that I worked for. At base, they were 12 when they took on this job, and they hired a bunch of folks and grew to 22 at most. And one of the fellows, on the far left there, is the fellow that got me involved in this, and he's another American who became really passionate about Carpenters Without Borders. And he came up with this line we were all talking about, wow, it's a chance of a lifetime. I can't believe that we're getting to work on this. And he said, no, it's the chance of 10 lifetimes. Because it's 800 years of history. Yeah, and he's hoping to live to 80. So I'm sure that all of you are in this room know this picture or something much like it. This is April 15th in 2019 when Notre Dame caught on fire. The exact cause of the fire is not known publicly. Maybe it is privately. There was work going on. You can see tons of scaffolding over the building, and it was probably someone soldering or an electrical connection, but a lot of lead work on Notre Dame. The whole roof is covered in lead, and so the most likely culprit is that someone was soldering and it didn't get cold enough, didn't get all out, and it just sparked a fire. But who knows for sure? I don't. But it led to a frenzy of different ideas about what they should do. Should they make a giant greenhouse on top of the original cathedral? Should it be a tower of stained glass? Should it be a beam of light? Should it be a swimming pool? Or maybe we should have something that kind of speaks to the fire and make this like flame mini spire. And I remember getting the copy of Paris Match, which is like their People magazine, in the summer of 2019, and looking through it and seeing all these wild and crazy ideas. And there were people, of course, who were saying, no, we should rebuild it à l'identique. It was the expression. And it's really thanks to these folks, as mentioned in the introduction, that it got done that way. So this is a gathering 2 years before of Carpenters Without Borders, also known as in French, Charpentiers Sans Frontières. And it's this group that was started by a fella who was in the Ministry of Culture in France, and who was really fascinated by traditional ways, both the ways that the French lay out timbers, but also the ways that they cut them. And this group, they get together and they, oops, I see, I gotta be careful. They get together and they'll reconstruct some historic thing. Like this, for instance, is the roof of the little chapel over Leonardo da Vinci's tomb in Amboise. And so this is the gathering of folks from all over France, and also people from Germany, people from England. It's an international tribe. There's Italians, there's Spaniards, and a few Americans. And these folks And Francois is right here. I don't, well, I do have a pointer, but it may accidentally advance the slide. That's Francois Calum right there. And he's the fellow that really spearheaded this drive to rebuild this thing à l'identique. And with this group, they built sample trusses, they lobbied the government, they made models, they wrote to people. And as a result, in the end, we don't have a swimming pool, though that would have been cool. We have a rebuilding of the roof as it was before the fire. People ask, oh, where were you, how was Paris? And I say, well, I really don't know, because I didn't spend much time in Paris. This is a map of the northern part of France, and you can see Paris way over there. And I'm way up here when I was working on this, which is about 2 hours between the two. And I'll zoom in a little bit, and I lived in this awesome place called Le Bec-et-Loin with a few other Americans, and we worked down here at the shop, and Remy, who you're going to meet, lived in Villers-sur-Neubourg there, about 10 minutes away. So beautiful bike ride from the shop through Brion, my nearest kind of small city, about the size of Montpellier, I mean, and that's where the shop was there in Nassandre. So this is an aerial view of the shop, and what I find cool about this is to see, was taken probably a couple years before all of this happened, and the amount of work they did to get ready. This was their original shop. They built an addition later on, so they had these sort of two shops, but when this job came into their business, they built a whole office out here out of a couple containers. They built a new shed here. They built a new shed here to house their sawmill, which used to be in here. They got the town to let them use all this ground because there were thousands of logs, well, hundreds of logs, huge logs, oak logs, stored out here. We ended up at one point working down the street at a building just off Picture, which is it's an electrical business, which is owned by a good friend of Remy. It was just amazing to watch them spread out and grow to take on this challenge. So I got invited to come to this opening meeting. The story of how I got involved in this involves this fellow named Hank Silver, who I had as a student at the Yestermar School. He came to learn timber framing in 2010. He was interested in timber framing, and at that time I was teaching at Yestermar quite a bit. And so this fella came, he took a class. He said, the class happened to be cutting an addition for my house, and he said, hey, I'd like to help you with that, finishing that off, and I happily engaged him to do so. And years go by, he worked for Timber Homes, which is the company that I work for, and started his own business, and then got passionate about Charpentier Sans Frontières. So he called me up and said, hey, would you like to be part of this crew to rebuild this? And I asked permission of my family first, and then of my business, and said, yeah. And I got invited to this kickoff meeting where we were all the potential timber framers that would be working on it, not all of them, a bunch of folks from the office of the National Office of Forestry, ONF. Then there were the whole architect team from Notre Dame. Then there were people from the community here and other interested parties. And it was a great presentation of the whole project and the tools that we would have to use and some historical precedents. And a review of the drawings. And this is, for me, one of the most fascinating parts of this whole story of the ability to rebuild this cathedral is really thanks to a couple of architects who chose to do their thesis project when they were graduate students on Notre Dame. And they went in and photographed and measured all of the roof carpentry, which is up in the dark, in the cobwebs, it's not very glamorous. I think I have a couple pictures that they took later on here, but they meticulously recorded the building. And it was really thanks to their photographs and their meticulous recordings that it was even possible to rebuild it à l'identique. So this is a picture of the cathedral, which some of you probably know well. This end right here is the choir, and that's the apse, that rounded part. We'll see some photos of that carpentry. This is called the transepts, and this X shape here is the base of the spire. And then this is the nave down here. And then lastly, these are the two towers at the end, the famous view of Notre Dame, or the entry to it is right here with the Gallery of Kings above, and these are where the bells reside in these giant towers right here. And I got to work on the roof carpentry of this portion. So the roof is really over here. All this stuff out here is flying buttresses out beyond the cathedral. So the part that the little company that I was working with worked on was the nave, and they were too small to get a contract like that. It's a huge contract, and so they partnered with a larger company in Angers, France, Perrault, very long standing. I think they're 160 years in business, and Perrault did the choir portion, and we did the nave, and then there was a separate group of companies that took on the transepts and the spire. And there's a distinction made here. I'll dance around. It's inevitable. That's what stories do. The choir and the nave are medieval in construction, whereas the transepts was rebuilt during the 1880s under the direction of Viollet-le-Duc and Jean-Baptiste Bessou, two architects. So this part was all sawn timber and bolted together, as was done in the 1800s, whereas these two parts, the nave and the choir, were traditional hand-hewn timbers is the idea, all traditional joinery à l'identique. There's more to be said about l'identique. So in the nave, there are 11 principal trusses that are about 10 feet apart, and then there are 4 between 10, 12 feet apart. There are 4 between them that are secondary trusses. So in total, we had 11 of these principal trusses. So these are the principal trusses, and then 44 of these secondary trusses, which, as you can see, are much simpler. And one of the really cool things about Notre Dame is the extent, even as far back as I read about it, they're constantly changing their minds, tearing stuff down, redoing it, figuring it out as they went. And I'm going to go back. I know you're not supposed to do this, and nothing is straight or square or plumb. So you might think this is the distortion of the screen, but it isn't. It's true, the thing wiggles around. The top of the wall is something like 30 centimeters out of level. And à l'identique also meant we're going to rebuild it like that. Which, if you build things, you know, it's way harder to make a thing really out of square and plumb and level. It's easy to make it a little bit out of square and plumb and level by accident, but to do it on purpose and meeting an old thing is very much more of a challenge than just building it straight. But and so and that cathedral, why is it all wiggly like that? Well, I can imagine easily. They were tearing down at one point they realized that the water cascading off the roof was damaging the foundations. This is early, like I think in the late 11s, early 1200s. So they're still building the thing. They realized, oh wow, but they started in 1160, first stone, 1163, Pope Alexander, and in 1180 they had their first ceremony or first mass inside just I got to go back again, just inside the choir. So they built a whole timber frame wall here, closed it in just temporarily so they could have a mass. And maybe it was at that point they started to realize, wow, the water is cascading off the roof. If it takes 100 years, you find things out along the way that you can fix along the way. So they tore down the whole roof and tore down the walls a little bit, rebuilt them higher so that they could do these flying buttresses that incorporated gutters and get the water far away. Just mind-boggling to tear that whole thing down and redo it. We'll get to more of those. But here you can see, again, they're thinking about it. Truss 1 and truss 2 and truss 3. They're different in subtle little ways where maybe this timber goes all the way to the ridge. I have a pair of them side by side so you can see oh, well, here's, in truss 2, there's this little king post. It gets all the way up there. But, oh, I didn't bother with that here. And there's a little difference in how they treat at the foot of this faux arbre à la trier from how they did it over here. And then little things that are harder to see in drawings at this scale. Joinery would be different. The shape of things were different all the time. It was far from standardized. So at that meeting, I also got a sense of, wow, one of the arguments, we can't possibly rebuild it à l'identique. We don't have the wood for it. Well, so part of what CSF did is they went out, they found some specific trees, they brought them in front of Notre Dame, they hewed them with axes, they joined them, and they raised it by hand with ropes and pulleys and human power to prove, like, one, we have the trees, two, we have the savoir-faire, the know-how, and three, it doesn't take that long. Look, we can do this by hand, and it turned out that they had plenty of trees. They had to look. They took very beautiful trees, but this is a board that tracked every log that they were needing, or every piece of wood that they needed. And about 70% of the wood came from National Forest, and then maybe another 30% was donated by private landowners. And they would track every single log. It would get GPS tag at the time of harvest. And then we had to track through the process, oh, we cut this log in two pieces, and that same log, this went over and turned into that tie beam, this became that rafter. Constant keeping up with this so that the Forest Service could study. First, of course, people that donated logs would love to know that their piece ended up here in the frame. But then also, the Forest Service wanted to be able to study, like, oh, all these trees misbehaved and they all came from that forest. So they could go back and see, well, do research on how wood behaves from different places and maybe figure things out with it. This was a Herculean task, keeping track of everything. At that same meeting, we had these models to look at. This was, I mentioned this earlier, Rémy Desmonts, who the company I worked for was Desmonts, Atelier Desmonts, which is Rémy Desmonts, who started it, and his son Loïc Desmonts, who is now the patron of the enterprise at 25 years of age. Mind-boggling, but his dad at 62 is slowing down and not quite retiring, but it's Rémy that built this model and was able to use this model to show, like, not only can we make the thing and here's what it should look like, but here's how I would raise it. So he would take it and show it to the architects. Well, we'd tip this up and we'd hold on to that and we put this and this and this. Very, very convincing thing, a physical 3D model. Computers are great, but there's something tactile about that. Then they also did full-scale joinery models to show the proposed connections, and then they had tools that on display, like, oh, this is an okay axe, and there were certain kinds of axes that were not okay. The axe is a very profound thing within all of this. It represents, I think, an attachment to a way of knowing, a way of doing, and a culture that is quite deep. And there was a lot of discussion about axes. There was a lot of hunting for axes. There was a lot of frustration. There was, of course, there's politics everywhere. There's purists who think it should have all been done with axes from the very, à l'identique, right, from the very beginning. But compromises were made, needed to be made. We used power tools lots of the time, and we would mill timbers on two sides and then hew them on two sides and finish all four sides with axes. It was pretty interesting to watch the machinations of people deciding how exactly we were going to do this thing. And I love, I feel like France is such a fascinating place. In some ways, very rigid. In other ways, totally laissez-faire. So this is at a tool museum in Troyes, a town near Paris. And they invited us to come and look through their axes and actually let us take a few axes from their case. And then they let us take a whole bunch from the basement to have patterns to send to blacksmiths who made the axes that we actually used mostly for the work that we were doing. So the other piece of great interest to me was getting toured around all around the neighborhood and seeing historical precedents or contemporary buildings from that time, or sometimes just something Rémy wanted to show us. So as a group, right after that large meeting, we went and saw this. This is a barn made by the Knights of the Templar, the Templiers, the Crusaders. It's right on the banks of the Seine, and it was built right about the same time as Notre Dame. And you can see, these are about 2 foot square, these giant posts that go up and support those purlin plates. And you could fit I could fit my entire arm into the largest crack in one of those that I found. But just mind-boggling to stand in a building that's 800 years old. And this one, you know, it's a barn, so very different kind of finish, but similar idea. Here's another one that was moved from its original location to not far from the one we were just looking at. And these are all, this was 20 minutes from the workshop, and France is just littered with these extraordinarily beautiful buildings, and often repurposed to do fun things with. So this is an event space now that has been standing around in Normandy for 600 years. This is a well. It's a hand-dug well. It's 60 meters deep, 2 meters in diameter, so that's 6 feet by about 180 feet deep, brick-lined all the way down, and then on top of it, this unbelievable curving hip roof thing just to protect the well, and then there's a wooden gear. An animal would have walked in a circle and would have caused the bucket of water, a large bucket of water, to come up 160 feet or whatever it was to the surface. Lest you think all we did was look at pretty buildings, and then soon you're going to think all we did was have parties. We did do some work. So the carpentry was supposed to be able to start in January, and in fact the plans just kept getting delayed. We ended up hewing for 2 months straight, which was not at all the plan and is not good for your body. I actually had it was a great way to get out. So the dog ate my homework. I got a burst appendix, and right at the beginning of the hewing process, and I couldn't be there for very much of it, which made me sad in a way. But I like hewing, but boy, 8 hours a day it's punishing. But this is a wonderful picture of Remy. So here's Remy, the patron of the enterprise. This is Miles Jeunesse, who is a fellow Vermonter from Heinsberg, Vermont Heavy Timber. In the back is Marlon, a young Englishman. And then over here we have 3 Frenchmen. And this fellow, Pierre, he's 20 years old, incredibly skilled. He's in one of the compagnons, one of the guilds over there. In fact, he's on his 3rd one. So France, unlike America, has this amazing tradition of a 700-year tradition of apprenticeship that is unbroken. So there are these guilds that, as a kid, a 15, 14-year-old kid, you can enter into these guilds, and it's sort of the alternative to going to university. And Pierrot, AKA Pierre, was in one of those guilds. And this opportunity, the guilds are very strict. If you're in the guild, there's rules about, you live in the dorm house, there's a dorm mother, you're not supposed to date anybody while you're in that situation. You absolutely have to move on at these distinct periods of time. Well, when Desmond got this job, and Pierre is from the area and had been working with them for some time, when they got the job, Pierre said to his guild, I got to stay here and work on this, which seems like a reasonable thing to ask. This is, for me, like they'll let you in the museum to take an axe out, but if you want to stay and work on Notre, nope, you're a journeyman, you're your apprentice, you got to go on, your 6 months is up. So he quit that particular, he switched to a different guild, stayed with that one, then he moved to yet another one. Funny story. Yeah, it was a wonderful experience of a variety of different cultures, and getting to be around people super passionate about timber framing and in specific about axes. Yeah. So down to the point of, hey, let's get the bread made with flower prints of people hewing. So I didn't get very far hewing before we had to stop. I'd only been there 3 days when the first party happened. So this is the Galette du Roi, which is the Festival of the Kings, January 6th, I think is what it is. And I just love this, and I would come to love it more and more. It felt like never a week went by that we didn't have some kind of grand celebratory event, because the architects were coming, or the general would be there, or it's the 6th of January, or it's Saint Joseph, which is the patron saint of carpenters, or hey, we got to go check out this wedding barn over here. So here we are, eating galette de roi, drinking local cider, might have been some champagne involved, and cutting it all, on chunks on clapeaux. These are little chunks that were knocked off in the process of hewing. And this would happen. It felt like once a week. It was probably not quite that. So finally, we were allowed to actually start to make some carpentry. And what we got to start on was the base of the roof. So the cathedral goes up 20 meters to the top of those walls, 60 feet, something like that, in the air is the top of those walls. And that's where the carpentry rests. So when you're inside any cathedral, you look up, all you see are stone vaults. You don't see the carpentry. And the way that it rests on the masonry walls is that there are two sills, and in French they're called sabliers. And these are the kind of little things I loved learning. Sablier, why? Because sable is sand in French. And they would build the masonry walls, and then they would put a little layer of sand on top of the wall, apparently, to sort of soften the landing. It would wiggle out over time, but you'd bed the timbers in the sand. So they're the sablier. And on top of these 60-foot tall walls, we had two sabliers that were connected together with little connector pieces. Those are sitting on the meter-thick, 3-foot thick masonry walls. And then inside of that, there were these special brackets that supported a third flying sill to the inside of that. So you can see all of this in this drawing. I can anyway. It's hard. There's so many lines, but I can see this is the outer sill here, the inner sill there, and then inboard of that is the flying sill. And each of these little things that you see is part of one of those secondary trusses that I talked about. So there's these short little miniature ties that connected the foot of the rafter and the little jambette that landed on the inside of that little tie. And then you can see our principal trusses are right here and right here and right here. Where you see a orange square out in the middle, that's one of our king posts. And these are our purlin posts off to the side. And we finally got the go-ahead to do this part of the work. And so we started. Actually, oh no, what did I do? We started. Whew. That's scary. And this is another just amusement to me. And it was constant when we realized we didn't have quite enough space to work that was dry. And Remy really wanted to set up a third scribe floor outside of in front of one of those sheds. In a day, he grabs a piece of melamine, he sketches out what he wants to do, and he starts to build it. That was on a Thursday that we concluded, oh, yeah, it would be helpful to have this additional space. Thursday, he's done the drawing. Friday, they're cutting stuff, and they've rented a mini excavator, and they've dug stuff out. And Saturday, they were pouring concrete. It was just like, boom, boom, boom. Well, here we have all this waiting for these very precise drawings. And this is what Remy said, look, we got to get going on these sills. This is what we're going to do. And this is, the sills, the initial cutting of them, so the scarfing of them, they're very long. The cathedral was, way longer than you could do in a single timber, so multiple pieces, and you can see these are all scarf joints here, and this is the extent of the plan under which those were cut. And here they are. So these are the two outer sills, and that's the flying sill, and those are these little the brackets that support them, and these little pieces, names, I love the name, Etresion, it just sounds so good. You can see the hewn finish here. You can see this fantastic medieval lifting engine that we had there. And this is one of the tie beams, which those tie beams each weighed about 3,000 pounds. They were about that big in section, like 12 by 14 in section or so, and 45 feet long. So they weren't easy to manipulate. They weren't even easy to roll. When we wanted to roll them, we would put long clamps on them and get 3 or 4 of us to roll them over, which just makes you appreciate how they must have worked and how strong they must have been just a few hundred years ago. A great moment of 2 Frenchmen, an Englishman, and an American, all yammering on about some detail of how we should cut or lay out the cogs, where these are those little chunks of tie beam. There's one of the real tie beams, and that's the bracket that supports the flying sill, right? There's the flying sill, and there's the other 2 sills. And just a little peek at some of the cutting process. This is one of my favorite French tools. I didn't actually love using it that much, but I thought it looked so cool, and I could understand how they won the revolution. It's called a bisagu, and it's got a 2-inch chisel on one end and a side handle, and then a mortising chisel on the other end, which is very narrow, like a 1/2 inch, as opposed to the 2-inch width of that one. And we don't work here in our shop. We work almost exclusively up on sawhorses. But in France, they often would work things down low on the ground, and so that tool is used with your body weight above the work, and the long, you have great leverage with that long. It's generally about 6 feet long. They do have miniature ones. Yeah, here you can see the need for these just to roll the timber over. That's how we would roll the timber over. Oh, I shot by it. So this gives you some sense of, after working on those sills, the next thing that I got to work on was all of these brackets that support that inner flying sill. And you can get a sense from this drawing both of how wonky the building is. You like, oh, wow, okay. And that's because that's a section cut, zoom, a theoretical plane cut through there. But the building's going like this. And so the roof is going like that. So that straight section cut ends up looking really funky because of how it interacts with the roof. And then you can see that we were given, for every single one of these braces, we were given distances we were supposed to match for where it hit the flying sill and where it landed on the post of the bracket. And they were all different.
The red Chevy Bolt is owned by somebody in this room, maybe, and if it is, that car's got to be moved.
We have a winner. So I found this interesting, the level of precision that they were wanting to achieve on this carpenter. Sometimes that just didn't match at all with à l'identique. You know that those guys back in 1200 were going like that. Good enough, and then they'd mark it. And I found it just was interesting whether you're doing it in the identical spirit or you're trying to identically match some tiny little detail. I just thought it was an interesting dance that I watched happening. And it definitely made all of it more complicated to keep track of. But these are the kind of drawings that we were working from, and setting each one of these up and adjusting, and you can see that they're different. Again, that did not look much like that. And oh, this guy has this little extra bit there that guy doesn't have, and the detail down here is quite different from the so we were supposed to match all these details on each one of these brackets. Eventually they ended up saying, well, let's just let the carpenters have fun on that's, you can do whatever you want there. Not whatever you want. You could propose and send a drawing, and the architects would approve or disapprove of what you proposed to do. Yeah.
Were some of these things destroyed during the fires, so you had to make it up?
All of it was destroyed.
So how'd you know what measurements?
So there's two things. They had probably more, but two specific things. I mentioned the drawings that were done by Rémy Froment, a different Rémy, and Cédric Tronceau. Those were the two architecture students. They had photographs of every one of these trusses. That's how they knew that that looked like that, and that on the other side looked like that. They had photos of, here's truss 9, south side. Here's truss 9, north side. Then they had a 3D pixel cloud map that they had done prior to the fire. And the 3D pixel cloud map allowed them to know exactly where this stone top of, really close to the millimeter, where things were. But you can't see anything about what's sort of in it, right? Like, so that whole, this all just appears, you can't tell that that's a joint right there. The pixel map just shows this as one big mass. Shows you accurately the outside of it, but doesn't tell you what's going on inside. So it was with those two things that we were able to get to this. And I didn't have anything to do with getting to this. I was cutting joinery happily.
What kind of wood did you use?
It's all French oak. All French oak. All freshly cut. Yep.
And was the whole roof burnt, gone, or was it partially burnt and then the rest of it was just?
No, the whole thing was burned.
So you guys, or you and others, replaced the entire roof of Notre Dame. Whoa. With French oak from all over France. It only came from France.
Only France, that's right. Yeah.
And it hadn't been dried?
No, timbers generally aren't dried. It's only nowadays that you can, it takes about a year per inch to air dry anything. So if you have a 10-inch thick timber, you're going to be waiting 10 years. And then it's really hard to work dry timber. It's much less fun to work it. So, but this is a good question because it does lead, we'll get there. Oh, I must have advanced. Did I advance? I did. I meant to advance. We'll get there. We'll talk about that again in a minute because it's a really interesting choice that they ended up making. So these, I got to work on these. These are these brackets, the chapeau de console, and right now we're trying to describe these braces, which are longitudinal. So this is the flying sill right here that we've talked about. This ultimately will be a post. If I go back, that's the post right there. That's the flying sill. And the brace that we're trying to, you don't actually see the brace we're scribing in this, you see the bottom of it is right here. It's going to go up and run into this timber here. This is all about supporting and also bracing against wind. So, oops, too far. So here we're scribing these longitudinal braces, and it's a pretty cool joint because it's going between two surfaces that are not 90 to one another. You can see that this is now plumb, and this is not level. Two timbers that aren't precisely, they are in a certain way. We've rotated it so that this surface is plumb, and the side of this is level, so you can hang your plumb bob, another great French thing. Well, why is it called that? Because it's made out of lead, which is plomb in French. You can hang your plumb bob right in here and get easy scribing on both these locations. Whereas if you had laid it so that this timber was level, which might have been a logical thing to do, this surface would have been out of level. And when you go to hang your plumb bob, you'd have a really big gap. It's impossible to talk about scribing really without having some string and some timbers in your hand, but I'll do my best. So anyway, this is a cool scribe setup, just cool. And this is again where we would be having to, this one's supposed to be 2.9 meters down here, and that one on the other side is only 2.8, and you got to kick this one out a little bit, and yeah. And this just shows, this is longitudinal framing. Like there's 3 layers. So down here, these stones, here's the sill layer. That's the flying sill right there. There's the giant tie beams. Then you go up a level, you have your first false tie, up another second false tie, up another level, third false tie. And then there's all this longitudinal bracing. And one of the things about scribing that's very, here in America, we mostly square rule frame things, which means we're using math and squares to do it. So if I burn a stick, which means I destroy one, I make a big mistake, I just go get another timber the same size and I use the numbers in my square, I can lay it out. But if you've scribed, like if I go back for a second, if you've already scribed this very specific timber to that one and this one, and then you make a mistake with this one, that's not the same as that one or that one, and all of a sudden it's a lot of things connected that you might have to go chasing. So you avoid that, and this just gives you a a quick window into the complexity of that frame. Oh, I went too far. And of course, we didn't get working very long before we had to take a break and go cut some trees down with axes, which cutting trees down with chainsaws is dangerous enough, but axes, it's really wild. These guys are making they've made a deep V notch on the far side, and with a chainsaw you'd make a notch over on that side, and then often you'd plunge right through, and the last thing you do, you'd clip this little bit here. You can take a good look around, you can set wedges, and then when you clip that, you can run. Well, with axes, the whole thing just happens a lot slower, and what they're doing here is they've made the notch on the far side, and now they're cutting a notch here, leaving this wood untouched, cutting another notch here, and then with axes, it's all being done with axes, they'll remove as much from that as they can until they are ready, and with one really big whack, they're going to get rid of this last little bit and hope it goes the way that they were intending it to go. Because you don't have wedges in here, it's a little less controlled. But we all survived. And oops, we thrived even. We thrived eating pig. More axe passion. I don't know if you can see that well. I think you can. The pig was tattooed with an axe prior to being roasted. And on the other side of the pig, it said Napoleon, which it's illegal in France to this day to name a pig Napoleon. I don't know if it's enforced much, but so they had Napoleon on the pig. And of course, the axe was used to cut the pig. Yeah. Not long after that, we had an incredible visit of folks from the ONF, the Office National de Forêt, who came to talk to us about dendrochronological dating, the quality of the forest around Paris at the time of the initial building of Notre Dame, which, according to them, I imagine, it's probably pretty bad, but actually Paris was a fairly small city at the time that Notre Dame was conceived. Rouen was much bigger, which is now much smaller. And it was also not too long after one of the many plagues came through. And apparently the forest around Paris had been really left alone largely for, 100 years or so. So the resource was actually quite good at the time that they built the cathedral. They didn't have to go far. Apparently they were able to find what they needed within a pretty, and of course at that time going far was a different game. But if you don't know about dendrochronological dating, it's pretty cool. By taking core samples from timbers in buildings which you know the date of, you can construct a historical record going back 1,000 years, or that's about the limit in wood. There's not much wood that's over 1,000 years that we know the date of it. And then you can tell exactly when any specific timber was growing by matching it up with the dendrochronological record that you have for that area. And these are being developed all over the world, and it's a way of dating buildings that's it's quite accurate. Now we get into the fun stuff, which is scribing of trusses. So after lots of hewing, we finally were released to do certain trusses, and it would come like a truss or two at a time. Okay, you can cut truss 11. They would agree, everyone would agree on the details of the joinery. The engineers would sign off on it. And there was remarkably little that had to be changed from the original joinery to make it past modern engineering, which is impressive. One of the principal things we had to do was hide a housing down at the foot of this timber right here called the faux arbre à la trier. It's like it is the upper chord of a truss. This is a rafter, and it's really just a rafter. Whereas this thing is carrying huge load. It's holding up this king post, and the king post is holding up the middle of the tie beam, and the engineers demanded that we put a housing there, but you weren't supposed to be able to see the housing, so it had to be tucked in, which of course makes it harder. You suddenly have a surface shoulder and a hidden contact point within. But this was the fun work, and every one of these trusses was different too. We had these reference planes that were theoretical through the building, and then we would have to match, well, because the building is doing that, so this truss is off a little bit from that theoretical plane, and we would make a full-scale drawing of each truss. So we would snap lines on the floor for where are the elements in this particular truss precisely, and then we would bring these huge timbers using that same telehandler, monstrous telehandler, to set the timbers right above our floor drawing. And one of the reasons I think that that Loïc, who's now the patron of Desmonts, was interested in having some Americans come is because we do a lot of square rule framing, which is not à l'identique, but it can save you time. So what we would do is we would actually do a little, we would assemble these false ties with this king post using just their 90-degree connections. So just a little flattening, and we would make them in advance. We'd make those joints in advance, which saved us significant setup and test fitting time. And then we would scribe in all the angly bits. And here's one of those trusses on the way. This, I think, is truss 10. This is the first one that we got to work on. And this is Will Gusakov, who also lives in Vermont, and Zachary LeBlanc, who also lives in Vermont. And we're just test fitting all of our joints. We haven't yet put on some, there's a couple more timbers to go on this truss that we'll see in a little bit. Lunches were great. I loved this at that shop that I worked at. Every day, 2 of us would stop early, what we were doing. We would go up to the kitchen where we would take out, and they always were in these reusable mason jars with just a rubber ring was the only thing you had to throw out. They got from a local catering company, soups and pasta sauces and various things. We would prepare some rice and some pasta, and we would have a leisurely lunch. There were not much phones during lunch. There was always a cheese plate would come out after, and usually a small coffee and maybe some dark chocolate. And then a few of us would go and lie down and have a little siesta on the timbers, which was delightful. It was an hour-and-a-half lunch. A lot of folks would drive home for lunch who lived right nearby, drive home to be with their family. Not a lot. 3 people did that.
So how many people on a team for one truss?
We and one other fella were working in this space. So what ended up happening in order to make it all work was there was a team that was in the original shop that was doing secondary trusses, and they were 3 at a time. Then there were 2 teams in the big shop that were still working on, when we got started on trusses, they were working on longitudinal framing. So like the king post line running, I showed you that picture of the funny section, and then also the 2 purlin plate lines to either side. So there were 3 to 4 typically in any given little team, and we had 4 different things going on, and all the time George was out there sawing more timbers, and things were getting moved around. But yeah, it was basically 4 teams of 3, 4, 5 sometimes at any given time.
Did you all speak French with each other?
Well, we did. Not everyone spoke great French. So Zachary did not speak much French at all, but is really into axes and traditional joinery, so he got invited. Will is a skilled French speaker and actually went over and spent a year in one of the guilds, living and learning and being a compagnon. And I spoke French pretty well because my wife is French. I had already been in France for 3 years when this came to pass. And then Hank, who invited me, lived in Montreal before coming down here, and he speaks very good French. And I liked it most when one of the French carpenters was in our crew, because it's easy to not speak French, and it was great practice for me to have him there. And he did not speak a lot of English, so it made me work harder. And that's him. That's Mathieu.
Were the crews predominantly men?
They are predominantly men, yeah. But it was neat. We had Séverine was a really talented carpenter. Lou is a really talented carpenter, and Solène. We had 3 women who were on the crew and working, and yeah. So which is interesting because the French here it's true too. Construction trades tend to be mostly men historically, and in France I think it's even more so. The guilds that I was talking about, only within the last couple of years were women even allowed to be in them. So that's a significant barrier to getting into the game if you're not allowed to get in the guild even. Yeah.
Was it because of your company there were so many Vermonters?
No, it's because, you know, I really don't know why that is exactly. There are other people around. It's a lot. It was a shocking percentage of the Americans that were over there, were like half of them or more. There were only 10 involved, I think, but of those 10, 4 or 5 were from Vermont. Yeah, yeah. I don't have a good explanation.
French, American, and British? Where are all these people working?
Well, the vast majority were French. And then in the shop that I was participating in, there was a young fellow named Marlon, 20 years old. His father's a green woodworker and timber framer, and he was the best hewer, fastest, cleanest hewer with 2 months of practice. He just got it. And he was young and could do it all day long and get really good at it. He's from England. And then Mike, who was a former Marine, working on his PhD in historical timber framing and construction practices, and he's from England. And then there was this guy Carlos from Spain. There were people from Italy, Spain, England. A guy from Germany came by, didn't work in our shop, but came to one of the parties, Saint-Joseph. This is Mathieu, who's French through and through, extraordinarily talented. It's humbling to be around the French. They're really highly educated in lots of ways, and then just talented. This guy had done the equivalent of a trade school over there, but he could make any tool. If you, we need some scrapers, he would disappear and he'd be back with 20 little scrapers. He had turned the handles, he had used some old steel, cut it and sharpened it up, and he would hand out the scrapers to everybody. Blew me away. I recently got to see a whole bunch of little dormers that he did, these little very fancy dormers that I wouldn't know how to begin to do, the various moldings. He cuts his own molding knives. It's pretty, it's just humbling to be around someone that talented and super sweet. And here we are working on a timber that used to be, it was part of a much larger thing, but this is in one of those trusses. It's just this tiny little post, but look at this. There's more joinery per cubic foot in that thing than anything I've ever seen. There's a 10 in there, there's another 10 in here, and there's another 10 in here, plus some really fun decorative reductions. Got to do some pit sawing. If you've never tried it, you should. It's fun. I liked it on the bottom better than on the top. Even though you eat sawdust and it goes in your eyes, I found it gentler on the back. I felt like I was working with gravity. But this was one of the more amusing things. They had these tall trestles, and we're sawing about a 18-foot long timber oak, 8 inches, and it took 2.5 to 3 hours to get that whole length sawed out. So these are 2 timbers that are going to, they're the pellets, and they're going to squeeze the truss, and they're lapped over the different entree. I could go back, but I don't dare. And they are suspending. They're also called the suspens, and they're actually holding up the massive tie beam. So that huge 10 by 12 tie beam that's spanning 45 feet can't do it. And they had these things on both sides of the trusses apparently when they first raised the carpentry. And why? There's a king post in the middle. Why were they doing that? The explanation that I was given was they were worried. They used the carpentry to build the vaults. So they would actually put the carpentry up first, and then they would use it like a crane. They would have a lifting engine on it, and they were worried that they might break it if they didn't reinforce it, picking up these enormous blocks that form the vaults. And it remains, but only on one side. So, and that's why they think it was probably a thing that was done for the purpose of the building, not for the long term. It's because they've removed the one side of it, and they wouldn't have done that if they thought it needed it for the long term. So anyway, pit sawing. It's really fun. I know it's not the first thing that comes to mind. But there they are now, pits on, and you can see where they're lapping across the various members of the truss that they're clasping. And this was another one of those funny moments of, well, surely we did these fancy chamfers, seemed beautiful to me, and so much is so different. But Mike, who actually was kind of charged with keeping an eye on the precise details of these reductions and these decorative elements, said, no, you have to redo those. And what he wanted us to change the proportions of it's hard to see from afar, but this basically gets chamfered on all four corners down to a little stop here. And he didn't like the proportions of the chamfer that we had done, and we had to redo them. And there they are. You can see it grabbing the second false tie, it's grabbing the first false tie, and here it's grabbing the main tie beam. And this is what the idea is. It was supporting this main tie beam. And it would get these keys across here that got wedged. We'll see them in finished picture. Wow, I'm looking at the clock. Nobody's in a hurry.
Working on it. How long were you there?
I was there only for 6 months minus my appendicitis. Yeah, I was there from January through June. I got to start speeding up. These are secondary trusses. So there's the short little chunk of tie beam. There's the cogs that land on the sablier. And that little jambette and a rafter and 1, 2, and 3 false ties. Oops. And then, because green timber does shrink, twist, check, move, and everyone was worried about this. How's this thing going to behave? The idea was, well, we're going to just put it all together as we cut it and stand it up in this giant tent. So they built behind the shop. This is 20. I think it was either 15 meters to the top of this tent, and the thing was big enough to hold the entire nave. So it's about 50 feet wide and 100 and some feet long, and this is the first of this is number 10, the first truss that I got to work on, all temporarily pegged together with these steel pins and ready to be lifted up. These are 2 shear legs, and you can see a bunch of pulleys and whatnot that we're gonna use to lift this thing up. And this was done at yet another party. Let's invite the architects. And so a busload of 30 architects comes out from Paris, and everyone gets on a rope, and we pull the thing up to vertical. I don't, and I shouldn't tell this story. Is this being recorded? I'm not I can't tell that story. I looked. I don't actually have a picture of all of us on the rope, but it was a cool moment. So we did that for this one, and then 2 weeks later, we put up another one. Let's have another party, and this time, people from the Office of Forests were there, and General Georges Georgelin, what was it? Yeah, the general that was put in charge. So the government, when they said we're going to finish this thing by the Olympics, they put a general in charge of the job, and he was a character. He definitely had a booming voice, a general type of voice, and I got to stand right beside him, pulling on one of the ropes. So yeah, we did it to truss 10, then we raised truss 9, and that you get a sense. So that truss is 45 feet across. And it's more than that, 50 feet or so to the peak. So yeah, maybe those are 20 meters. Yeah. And just the material management. When we get to the pictures with the scaffolding, it's the most amazing thing. So here we are after raising the second one, truss 9, second one that we completed. And this is one of my people stories that I enjoy. This is Thomas, another of these young French carpenters who's now on his tour. So he's being moved from shop to shop. And he and I got to cut all those brackets that support the flying sill, or lay them out. We laid them out. I got to work on cutting them a little bit, and he got to cut a lot of them. And then towards the end of my time, and I think this was in actually early June, we finally got to go down and visit the work site. So now we're gonna take a little tour of the work site. And if you get a chance, I thought, it's gonna be kind of silly, but I loved it. There was a 3D virtual tour in a parking garage underneath the cathedral, and we all put on these crazy VR helmets, and we'd go in little groups of 5. So there's Mike, the Englishman who made me redo the Pince Moise. There's Remy, he's not sure at all about this whole virtual thing. That's Loic, who's definitely on board. So we'd go in, and you can't see anything, obviously, but you can see the mesh outlines of the people that you're with, and they have names, and then you can see mesh outlines of other people, and if you got close to banging into like a pole, a whole little mesh outline would appear in your world warning you of this. And this virtual guy invites you to come and walk into the cathedral, and it's under construction, and like there's workmen walking by with wheelbarrows. All of this is virtual, and you could walk anywhere. I mean, you could not anywhere, but you could walk around within this thing and see perspectives you could never actually get. So like you at one point he invites you onto a platform, which is just the floor you're on, but you think, because of what happens in your helmet, that you are going up on a rope-lifted worker platform, and you get all the way up there, and now you're standing in front of the rose window, and you can walk right off of the platform, because the floor is still there, and go out in the middle of the rose window and look at it. It was pretty cool. And at the very end, there was a little model of the cathedral that you could walk around, a virtual model, and I discovered that if you just stuck your head inside the virtual model, you could see it was true even inside, like wild. So if you get a chance, it's I think a permanent exhibit. And this is outside. Another just like, so this is staging that's new. The first step after the fire, very first thing they had to do was just get rid of all the old staging that was there, which was hundreds of tons of twisted metal. It took them, I don't know, a year or more just to get rid of all the old stuff. And I'll talk about the lead later, yeah. So, and then they had to restage it, and they had to temporarily hold up the flying buttresses, or they thought they did, who knows. But the reason they did this was that the buttresses are there. If you have 400 tons of lead on a roof, it tends to push out, and the buttresses are there to stop that from happening. Well, if you take away tons, the worry was, will the buttresses shove the walls in and break, push them in the other direction? So they built these unbelievable, there were like 1,000 $10 bolts in each one of these things. I just can't imagine the staging and temporary support bill for this project. We got to tour around and see the sculptures that were being made. They would have, in some cases, damaged ones, or some drawing record from Viollet-le-Duc, who designed something like over 100 gargoyles and pieces of sculpture. And they had cleared out in front of the cathedral, and that's where this whole sculpting workshop was. And then we got to climb up and hang out with the sculptures. So we got to go all the way up the staging and cruise around. And so these are chimera. They're not chimere. They're not gargoyles. The gargoyle is spitting water. Gargle. Right? It's got to be. When we were way up inside there, we got to see one of the things that they were still working on. With the disappearance of the roof, an enormous amount of water, rain, and various salts got into the stonework and would have damaged the masonry. And so they plastered the entire interior of all the vaulting with a ½ inch of bentonite clay. And that would suck the salts out of the stone, and then they would scrape it off. Maybe they had to do it twice in some cases, I don't know. But these folks were scraping off the bentonite clay that they had put on. Down here, it's still on. And up here, you can start to see the stones again. And now we're outside. So I'm standing right on the apse. This is the rounded part right here in front of me. And then I'm looking through the transepts. The spire is starting to come. There's the very few base timbers are already up, and then you can see a vertical. And then beyond the spire is the nave, which we worked on, and beyond that is the pair of towers. And it was amazing to see them rebuilding these intricate walls and rose window walls, and a fair amount of masonry got damaged. It was a miracle that they saved the firemen knew not to hose down the stained glass. They saved, I think, all of the stained glass. All the large pieces were saved, which was pretty amazing. And they had a sense of humor, Quasimodo. And this is looking up one of the, I showed a picture early on of the plan view and the transepts and the X that in plan you make out the base of the spire. Well, this is the beginnings of the spire, one of the giant sort of, it would be a valley, but it's not. There's stuff above it. But this work was incredible. The size of these timbers were huge, and the cuts were angly all the time. And so the French, that fellow Francois Calum that I mentioned, he was also responsible for getting the French system of scribing into the UNESCO World Heritage treasures as a cultural heritage. It's a savoir-faire, a know-how. So it's not a building, it's not a thing, but he has gotten their system of layout, which allows you to do these incredibly complicated geometrical assemblies without any computers, without any math even, really. It's all done by it's called developed drawing in our world, and it's all done by taking planes of a building and laying them down on a sheet of paper, and you can, I'm not even gonna try to explain that to you, but we got to go in the bells, like not just in the bell towers, but in the bells. Yeah. Which a number of these were melted down during the revolution to make bullets, but the biggest didn't get taken down. This is where I lived. I mentioned I lived in Le Bec-et-Loin, and I lived in this beautiful old Bill building. That thing was still turning, and I lived way up there in the attic. And this is Hank, who brought me into this, and Miles. These were two of my housemates. I lived with another fella from Ohio, Scott Carlson, and Zachary LeBlanc. And we would often have dinner out here with Remy and Loic, and it seemed like fairly regularly, oh, we're having dinner at your place. I would be unaware of this, but I'd come home, because Miles was a chef in a former life, and one time Remy was headed our way, and he hit a hare, not a rabbit, he hit a hare on the way. And so I come down to get my bicycle out of the basement, and there's a dead hare draped on not on my bike, but on the railing of the water wheel behind my bicycle. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And that night, Miles is cooking up the hare with another one that Danielle, the electrician I mentioned, we borrowed his shop space a little bit. Danielle shows up with a second hare. I don't think he'd gotten that one with a car. And we would have these just delightful parties with cider. You know, you can go to the market in Brionne today and get a bottle of really good cider for €3. It's a dangerous place. And right out front, we had this really fun little entry. This is classic Normandy style of framing. And this was my last day, which of course wasn't my last day, because I was on the WhatsApp feed. And so I got all these pictures that just made me a little hungry and a little envious. This is another party, because they're putting up another truss with a whole bunch of people at banquet tables. And really fun. And then they started installing it, and that's just like, that's a work of art. And what blows me away is I don't know how they did it 800 years ago. I just don't know how they did it. I mean, in some ways I do, but in other ways, it's true. Human life was, the safety rules around this staging were higher than the ones around that staging. So here's one of the first trusses going in, that I think is our truss 11. And Hank, who is footloose and fancy free, from the very beginning said, I want to be on the raising, I want to be on the raising, I want to be on the raising. And it wasn't the company that Desmond partnered with in theory, held on to the raising in their scope, but they agreed that 3 people from Desmonts could be present because you need somebody to say, oh yeah, that piece goes there, and Hank got to be one of those 3 people. So many of these pictures that you're going to see are from Hank. Just flying in a secondary truss. There were 2 different cranes on site most of the time, sometimes 3, and there was a crane control room where there was somebody who was just supposed to be paying attention to the cranes not running into each other, which, of course, did happen. But part of the challenge of thinking about and scheduling and, God forbid, bidding such a job, you have no idea whether you get to use the crane today. You get 2 hours on Thursday because there's masons, there's staging folks, there's stonework, there's so many different trades. We're loading in the sheetrock today, and yeah, coordination. No. I haven't heard anything like that. No, I do know they had to do some fiddling. This is one of the places that there was frustration and fiddling, was meeting the masonry, specifically at the bell towers. Which I think basically they had to say, it was weird. Lots of masonry got damaged in the fire. Some of it they saved. Some of it, the masons would rebuild it, but they would send us these drawings that had measurements to the millimeter for it's going to be here. And so they're basically telling the masons the same thing. You have to build that rock to where it was in the original, which is, it's challenging for woodworkers. It's hard for masons too. So I think some of it came from the drawing saying this is what it's going to be, and the masonry actually, when it got rebuilt, not being like that. And I'm sure there was some chiseling of tenons and whatnot, because even if you assemble it, then you take it apart, truck it down to Paris. It sits up on, they built about 30 feet up in the air, they built this structural platform, not all around the cathedral, but a lot on one side, and that's where all the timbers, they would get delivered, then craned up onto this platform and assembled up 30 feet in the air, so that down on the ground they could be storing statues and, yeah, logistics.
At what point did the pegs get put in?
The finished pegs didn't get put in until down in Paris, because it's real hard to get them out. Yeah, so we would use those steel pins that have a little tag and a hole in them, and you can take another one of them and twist it or tap on it with a hammer. Yeah. Sweet little moments, like this is one of the timbers that we all put together, and there I am. I'm on the end grain inside the cathedral. Pretty fun. And how could you not say yes to 2 people like that, inviting you to come and do something? So this is Remy, and Remy, he's just always, in my experience, I'm sure Remy has his days, but I don't know that I never saw him lose his cool, and he was always friendly and welcoming. And for me, the experience of working on Notre Dame was obviously an amazing experience from a timber framing perspective and a historical perspective, but it was equally, and maybe even more so, a human experience for me of meeting just wonderful folks, passionate about what they're doing, welcoming, friendly. I was blown away by the hospitality. Remy and his wife took us to their second home for a long weekend. They would almost every weekend, hey, what are you doing on Saturday? You want to drive around and look at we're going to see the boat show up in Rouen. You want to come? And just always ready for a laugh. These are actually sunglasses that Hank bought for driving, and Remy's like, let me see those. And when my family came to visit, yeah, let's have a party. More cider, more cake. And patiently took my kids around, took my brother-in-law over. Hey, try this pit sawing here. Try this hewing axe. Yeah, they got a good thing going over there. And I leave you with this glowing image, which is from my little village, Le Bec-à-Loin. This is 2 blocks away. It's an 11th century monastery. And I just caught this moment at sunset. It's just, yeah, gorgeous. That's all. I think that's the last picture that I have. Yeah, it is. I was. And I must have, you know what? Yeah, I was going to say something about the lead, and then I realized, so I didn't put some pictures in here that I took. I got to go back this summer in July, and I got to do another tour with Hank. And feel free to leave if you have any time constraint. If you want to stick around, I'm here for another little while. So on the tour with Hank, when I went back in July, they were installing, they were putting on lead. The sheet lead that just goes on the roof it's pushing 1/8 of an inch thick. It's really heavy stuff. It's 400 tons of lead on that roof. And all along the ridge, there's this ornamentation, and it's two different pieces repeated, one after the other, alternating. One of them it's about this big, sort of leafy thing, and it weighed 250 pounds, each one of them. And then in between those were little spires, little fleur-de-lis spires, and those weighed about 75 pounds. And all of that was there, à l'identique, and all up in smoke or dribbling down in stone. The access to the site was, by the time, on our first visit, we had to put on hazmat suits, we had to have special booties. When I went back in July, I didn't have to put on, yes, we did. We still had to put it, but no special booties. And you would enter, it was very controlled, razor wire around the whole site. You have to have a code or a pass to get in, just in first. And then you're in a little courtyard, and now you have to talk to the man. And he's behind the glass screen, and you have to give him your ID, and you have to have an appointment. It's not, you can't just go and visit it. You have to have an appointment. And he takes your ID and keeps it, and gives you a little pass that allows you to hit, that makes the turnstile work for you. In you go through like the security turnstile, and then you're confronted with this huge building that's like, I don't know, is all made out of containers, is 100 feet long and 6 stories high. I don't know, some of it was architects' offices and construction supervisors, but the bulk of it was lockers. So you would get, if you were a regular worker, you would be assigned a locker, and there was an area for guests, and you would go in on the clean side, and you would have to take off your clean clothes and and then go through the showers and put on your dirty work clothes. And for a long time, a hazmat suit over them, eventually not. And then you would go about your day. At lunchtime, you would have to take off your hazmat suit, shower, go out, clean side, go and have your lunch. Come back in the gear, and it's a huge building just for protection from the lead. Meanwhile, for 2 months, nobody said anything to any of the schools in the area, which of course were very contaminated with lead because the plumes, let alone the apartment buildings right next door. When you are in that neighborhood, you realize, like, wow, there were people who hope the spire doesn't fall this way. It could have, yeah. So anyway, lead, it was a huge deal. It was more, we had these white suits. We didn't have masks. When I went.
Breathing in the lead.
Yeah, I mean, you could have been, if there was dust around. Anyone that was working on like plastering or anything, it evolved over time, and they were constantly checking the site, and if you were, depending on which of the trades you were in, you had to get a weekly or monthly blood test to see are your lead levels elevated, and yeah.
How long did this whole project take?
So the fire was in April of 2019, and it's going to be open in December to the public, which is stunning. They were hoping to do it for the Olympic Games that were this summer. They didn't make that, but it's kind of mind-boggling that it's interesting to see certain things that are being done in funny orders, just like building a wall to have a mass in 1183, because they really wanted to do that. But what a crazy thing. So when I got to tour in July, inside, it's unbelievable. They have replastered all the vaults. They have cleaned all the stained glass. They have repainted the side chapels. It's just going to be well worth a visit. It's magnificent. And I look up, and some of that replastering work, they're going to have to redo it already, because there was no roof, so rain was falling and on chunks of timber, and they've put up some timber, and you can't, like, you just can't. It's impossible to protect it all perfectly. And oak has lots of tannins in it, so you get brown staining from the oak-soaked rainwater coming through. And then I heard that they really wanted to be able to ring the bells at, what was that point? So they were gonna partially, there's some repair work needed in the bell towers. Those giant bells, another cool story, those don't touch there's timber frames inside those masonry bell towers. And those timber frames they do way down low, but up high, they don't touch the masonry bell towers. Because those bells, which weigh, like, I think the big one it's either 5 or 50 tons. That's a big difference, but whichever way, it's heavy. And when those things are swinging, the masonry can't handle it, whereas the timber can flex. So the idea is that the timber holds the bells and flexes inside those bell towers. Well, one of the bell towers got very mildly, not so much, it got some fire damage. Neither of them got burned down, and one didn't get touched at all. But in exploring that fire damage, they realized, wow, the feet of these posts that hold these bell towers up are rotting. And so they've decided there's like 8 possible places that you could fix, and they've decided they'll fix 4 of them now so that they can ring the bells, and then they'll fix the other 4 later. But it adds a whole lot of complexity, not just to fix all 8 now. Like, once you're jacking it up and fixing 4, fix those other 4. Don't put it back down, ring the bells, and then pick it up again. This is the kind of thing that you do when you said, I'm going to get it done in 5 years, or I really want to ring the bells on such and such a day. Yeah.
It strikes me there'd be a lot of interest in general, like this kind of audience. There'd also be a lot of interest from graduate school design or professional design officers. Have you been on the road with this talk?
Tirelessly. No, I have not. Nope, I haven't. It might, you never know. You should have had cider.
You mentioned steel pins. Did you only use steel pins, or did you use?
No, those steel pins are just instead of a peg when you're going to take it back apart. So for test fitting, we would pin it temporarily with those steel pins that are easy to pull out. Yeah.
How many pegs did you have to use?
Well, I didn't use any, and I never did a count, not even close, but it would have been thousands. Yeah, would have been thousands.
How do they protect with no roof? I'm sure it must have a very elaborate flooring system in the cathedral and the walls. How, when there was no roof on it, what did they do? Put a tarp over it?
They sure did, yeah. I'm happy to cruise back really fast to try and find things to respond to questions. I think it was right there that we saw that. Yeah. Okay, the lights, if you want to turn the lights off, I'm happy to stay for another 20 minutes or so, and then I do need to go. But this was a really heavy-duty tarp. And that sounds simple, but it's not. It goes down into the wall sticks up a couple meters above the low point of where the vault hits the wall. And so, well, great, now you got all the water here, what do you do with it? They actually did make temporary gutters leading to downspouts to get the water away, because it would have done a lot of damage to the foundation if all that water had just dribbled down, or the walls, or...
Did they do anything to all that, any kind of surface, or it's just the raw? And hope for the best.
It lasted 800 years last time. Yeah, well, and they've made a huge change in the fire situation. So there were no sprinklers in Notre Dame prior to the fire, and the alarm system was very old, and one of the reasons they think that it got out of hand was that the person who heard the alarm did actually go and look and didn't smell anything, but now they wonder, well, was it even, did they go to the right place? Because it was all it had been pieced together over the years. Now they are constructing up in the roof carpentry fire rooms. They're both access so firemen can get up in there safely. They have 2 layers of 1-inch thick sheetrock on the walls of these things. And then inside some of those fire rooms are misting stations. So it's much like what they do in server farms, where they can't just douse the computers with full-on sprinklers. So instead they mist them. And if I understood correctly, the idea is that you are displacing the oxygen with mist, not so much that you're adding water as getting rid of oxygen, which means that the fire doesn't have anything to breathe. Yeah.
When they were doing the timbers, what happened to all the waste? How did they dispose?
Yeah. Well, the French government owns all of it, in theory. And I saw a lot of it go to Remy's backyard. No, I mean, there was tons of it, tons and tons of it. A lot of it is sort of like compost. So we would put it in these giant bags that you see in Europe all the time. They're white, and they're 3 yards over here of volume, and they're like 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet. And we had just, the fence was lined with these bags of this stuff.
They were recycling something.
Yeah, it was unclear to me what was going to happen to it. I know that a farmer who helped out a bunch got some but I mean, the amount of it is stunning. Yeah.
Did you guys volunteer your time, or were you paid?
No, we were paid. Yeah.
All of the Americans and the English and French?
Yep. I think it would have been illegal to volunteer your time, and yeah. So, I mean, that's that dichotomy between here, we're going to build it like this, Sharpie on a piece of melamine, and oh, if you want to drive the telehandler, you got to go down to the local building school where they have a medical office, and they'll do an exam on you and check your heart, and I had to get a medical certificate just to drive the forklift. So, but come on in the museum. Which axe did you want? Yeah. Yeah.
You said maybe none of the stained glass windows were gone, destroyed, or some of them were.
I think they saved almost all of them.
But the rose window made it.
Yeah.
But some of them may have been. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah, maybe. No, the basic point being, wow, the firemen did an amazing job. They knew not to spray those windows, and they were able to put that fire out without destroying some priceless rose windows.
Did I understand that they were trying to take the lead out when this all happened?
They were doing repair work. I don't think they were trying to take the lead out. Among the things they were doing may have been...
Lead back in as part of the restoration?
There's 400 tons of lead on the roof of Notre Dame now, again. Yeah.
And they decided that because that's the way it was.
That's the way it was. It lasts an incredibly long time. And I didn't stop at a good picture of this, but there's lots of places where there's a wooden thing that's basically outside, and they would cover it with lead. And lead is extremely malleable. So there's this fine art, like up on the, part of why you didn't see is those are all pictures from, I'm not supposed to show any pictures from the finish. I could get in trouble for that. But I have some pictures of some of these little tiny dormers up on the roof, and it's an oak thing, but you wouldn't know that because it's all you see is lead. They have literally, taken sheets of lead and hammered it around and then soldered it. So it's like totally go up the spire. I got to go up the spire. I got to climb to the very top of the spire. That was amazing. Yeah, and way up there, the people that are working on the lead up there are les cordistes, who also did tons of work removing staging that had melted into the roof. But les cordistes are hanging from a pair of cords that are going out these little, trefoil windows of the spire way up high and dangling down, and they're hanging in their harnesses doing lead work, and yeah.
Is there more work to be done? It's going to open, but what else has to happen?
This I do not know, but I'm sure that there's plenty more work to be done, even after they open it. Yeah.
I think we should